Do you find me fuckable in my tie leather pants? If you find me touchable, extend your hand for a grab.
Welcome to Hard Talks with Chris and Friends, where topics that are hard or will make you hard are talked about. Where things get real and unfiltered. Here is your host, Christopher Velasquez.
Hello, you guys. Welcome back. Today, I will be talking about a topic that has shocked the state. No, actually, the world. This podcast episode won't be like the others. The format's going to be a little bit different. But, I thought today's conversation was important to have. Like I said, in this podcast, we will have those conversations that are hard to have. And when it feels like the world is stopping and having a conversation, I will stop too and have the conversation with you guys and have a friend come on and help me have this conversation. I'm Hispanic and I'm so proud of being Hispanic. I'm gay and I love my gay culture. I'm part of a lot of different cultures and communities. But there's for sure one that I have a big connection to. And it's not just because of my sexual or my romantic connections to it, but I think in a big part it's because I have a lot of friendships that have turned into family, that have turned into mentorships, that have turned into a lot more things. In the black community, which is the community I'm talking about, is going through a lot right now. And I wanted to take a minute and bring a friend of mine's to have that conversation with me today. Someone that is incredibly smart, does amazing things for the community, and I've every time we've talked and every time we get together, it's always a good kiki. But before I introduce him, I should say before we start talking about all of this, you know, him and me will just be discussing this as our points of view as people of color. We will be talking about personal experiences and how we see the world. We don't want to hurt anybody. We don't want to say anything that might hurt anybody. This is just how we see the world, and this is just a discussion of what's happening in the world right now. So with that said, let me start and let me introduce you guys to Bryton. Bryton, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
So let me start with how's your quarantine going? Besides the topic we're going to talk about today, but how's your quarantine? How has it been just being home all the time?
So my quarantine's going, pretty good. Uh, when it all first started, I think I was like many people, I was doing a lot better. I had some momentum, I had some energy behind my desire to self-quarantine. If anything else, a lot of things were fear driven. So, the fear back then was real strong. And so I was just motivated to stay inside. We're a couple months into it now. California started opening up. Businesses are open, things are happening. And I'm definitely starting to feel the fatigue of quarantine.
Yeah, and I think we are all starting to feel that fatigue with quarantine and how long is quarantine taken. But why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. So my name is Bryton. I am a, I don't know how to comment on it. You know what? I'll say it like this. I am presently in prevention training. There's some things happening at work where some things are shifting. But presently I'm a prevention training specialist. Uh, so I do a lot of work with HIV and STI education, prevention, testing. Uh, I am also a full brother of Onyx Southwest. Woo woo. Um, oh my God, what else? I am a pup. I am black. I am very gay, and I feel like I'm listing my credentials. What else?
I know it's always hard to talk about yourself. That's why I hate doing it, and that's why I had Brittany on my first podcast because it's just so hard to just tell people, hey, this is about me, and let me put it in the least words I can. But yeah, let's talk about what's happening in the world right now. Today's topic is Black Lives Matter. I want to start with a word association and just kind of see what feelings or what thoughts do these words make you feel or what thoughts come to mind. Now, the reason I'm doing it this way is because as someone that does come from special day classes and has an IEP, I think a lot of the times the way I learned stuff was relating stuff to certain words. So instead of learning maybe the whole book, I would read the whole book and then I would associate certain feelings or certain thoughts to a couple words, and that would make it easier for me to keep the information for longer. So I know that there's people out there that that's kind of how they learn stuff and or just keep information. So I think that's that's how I kind of want to start this, or that's why I wanted to start this like that. So here are the words. The word will be George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, systemic racism, and things need to change. What feelings or what thoughts come to your head when I say those words?
Um, well, a couple of things come to mind, but of course, they also come to mind for me within the context of, the podcast right now, within the context of the Black Lives Matter movement. Um, and essentially, you kind of began with how people learn, how these messages are being delivered. And a lot of that is through a really consistent and strong repetition of, like you said, the same kind of ideas and the same messages. And that has been incredibly powerful. So, for example, on Twitter, all on social media and Instagram, the thing that was trending was justice for George Floyd, justice for Breonna Taylor, justice for Ahmaud Arbery. These were things that had to be said over and over and over again. We had to, again, hashtag Black Lives Matter, and eventually, the LGBTQ community amongst Black people, or with Black people rather, we had to start saying all Black Lives Matter to then tackle the message of justice for any of the trans lives that have been lost. So we've had to keep a consistent message with that. And that's really what Black Lives Matter is to me. That's what comes to mind. Black Lives Matter. We need to dismantle systemic racism. And they're very simple, like they sound like regurgitations because they largely are. These are not just my feelings, but these are things that just have to be said over and over again for a consistent message.
Yeah,
Defund the
and
police, abolish the police. Like there can't, at this point, there's really almost no room for too much deviation from that, from that message, if that makes sense.
yeah, and I strongly agree with you. I think I chose those words because those words encapsulate the feelings and the thoughts of everybody who is trying to fight for more equality and more justice. And funny enough, I think this quarantine and us being kind of stuck at home has been a big thing that has moved this forward. I think, at least in my personal experience, it's been easier. This is not the first time something like this happens. I think it's happened too with, the school shootings where we think after something like that happens and as a state or as a country where we're shocked, we think that things are going to change, and then we realize that it's easier to get busy with our everyday lives, and I do that. I get busy with my everyday life, with work, with everything going on, that it's easier to just kind of ignore it and push it in the back burner, or just nothing changes. I think for the first time, because we are in quarantine and we are stuck at home, there was a level of, we have to deal with this and we have to change stuff, because we can't just ignore it like we have ignored it so many times before. And I think, I know that the black community has always had to deal with this, but it's been easier for other communities to not put a focus on it or not really pay attention, because it's one of those things where it's like, when it doesn't affect you, or you think it doesn't affect you, because racism affects all of us, but when it doesn't affect you directly, it's easier to just push it in the back burner, like I said, and let it be something that will, someone else will fix this, or someone else will solve this. And for the first time, it's, like I said, in front of all of our faces, and we can't hide from it, and we can't put it in the back burner. And mind you, because of quarantine and because of Corona and everything that's happening, I feel like a lot of things have come up to light too. As people of color, we are resourceful. We find those places where we could express our communities, where we could express our art, where we could express ourselves, which, people that are more privileged, like white people, they could go anywhere and express themselves, and they feel at home anywhere. But there's less places where people of color can express themselves. There's less places where people of color can go dancing, can go express their art. It's just, and all of that is coming up to light, and it's hard. And a lot of people are having a hard time having these conversations, and having these conversations thrown at them. A lot of people in privilege are not used to having these conversations, and don't want to have these conversations because it makes them uncomfortable.
Ooh, almost lost my train of thought. Hold on. um, I would say that, if anybody feels kind of like, these messages are being beaten over their heads, like it's just so constant and just unending. If that is how you feel, not only is that kind of like okay, but that's the point. At this point, I folks are using social media and these different platforms when nobody has anything other to do than be on social media. People are using it at this point to literally beat folks over the head, and that is the point. Like, because of quarantine, yeah, folks absolutely cannot run from it, or at least, that's the feeling. But the reality is, non-black people can still turn off their phones. They can go watch shows on Netflix for a couple hours. they
Yeah.
can they can disassociate for a period. Meanwhile, black people cannot. Even if we turn off, our phones and decide to not pay attention, well, now we've become complicit in perhaps not witnessing somebody getting killed on Facebook Live, because now that shit's happening, right? Now people are actually using like their social media to keep themselves alive if they're going someplace. So, social media and phones and technology have become tools to fight off, these systems of oppression, just as much as they're used as tools to oppress us. I'm speaking more about how we're using them to fight back at this point. And you're definitely witnessing the fruits and the concerted effort of all that. These messages need to be constantly out there in order to tear down and dismantle the things that are oppressing us. Like, for example, I don't think if this was going on, I would be able to have conversations about abolishing the police, right? Like, at this point in time, so many videos and so many people are just feeling more liberated to come out against the police. That's always been a conversation. That's always been something somebody was talking about somewhere, right? But now, because of how consistently we're talking about it and how intense the pressure is, those things
Yeah,
are actually starting to
and
be a possibility. There's power in, and it's a shame that somebody has to die in order to create that shock value. But to be clear too, I feel like the only people who are ever shocked into action are folks who haven't been desensitized to it, right? So shootings are so jarring when they happen that because I mean they happen a ridiculous amount in this country, and it's a shame. It's shameful. When it happens, you're absolutely right. It sparks a brand new conversation that has been happening, but for whatever reason died off for a period, and then it sparks another one to begin. I think what's happened with like George Floyd's killing, for example, was not only did it spark some outrage, but then again that video, and again I have a whole issues with black bodies being, used to sensationalize a lot of these issues like that. Yeah, you really just anyways, look, I'll go into that some other time, but point being is, the circulation of that video, the circulation of footage of black people dying and getting beaten, and just the circulation of images of the police being thugs, that has power. And the fact that it's been able to consistently be in everyone's feeds is what I think is helping keep that momentum going. Even now, like I've been seeing on Instagram and Twitter people keeping that justice for Breonna Taylor hashtag going, and now the conversation has evolved just a little bit. Now it's like, yeah, thank you so much for your activities during the height of the protests, but demand justice for Breonna Taylor, or thank you so much for liking my nude, but demand justice for Breonna Taylor. Go harder for Breonna Taylor. Like there's some sort of movement, like somebody behind the scenes is just super fucking clever, and I have no idea who it is, but it's like, yeah, that's exactly how you need to be doing this.
Honestly, yeah, I echo everything you're saying. We need to make sure that the momentum keeps going, and even weeks after all of this is like done and it's not the top story anymore, we need to continue moving forward and not lose what the thought of what we're working for. We need to make sure our voices are keep being heard, and we need to make sure that we continue posting and just being vocal like we are. We can't lose all this momentum we've been getting. We need to educate ourselves. I'm listening to this podcast. It's on the history of the police, and damn, if the history of the police is not dark, and where it comes from, it's just like I can't even start saying how dark it is, and you kind of realize like how racism is like part of the fabric of what the police departments are, and it's so dark. But you guys should for sure listen to the podcast. It's called Behind the Police. They talk about the really dark stuff, and it's a short podcast. I think it's gonna be like it's only was like 6 episodes or something like that. Listening to the podcast, you kind of see how the police was and started off of defending the slave owners after the abolishment of slavery, and how they were only really defending them because they thought that they were gonna attack them after slavery was abolished. But even if you go a little bit more back, like they were just thugs that people hired for defending their businesses. So it kind of like very feels like, oh, this is what they still are. Like, they're still protecting the white man. They're still, you know, oppressing people of color, and they basically work for the people who have money. They don't work for all of us. So yeah, it's a great listen. You guys should listen to it for sure.
I'm about to give a plug in your podcast to a video because it was so good. It is No, the Police Cannot Be Reformed with Professor Alex Vitale. I think that's how you say it. It's Vitale. It's on For Harriet, her YouTube channel. And it is such an enlightening conversation because, the professor not only goes into what the history of the police is, like what that history looks like, but he connects it to, the systems of capitalism and how really the police were designed to help maintain not just the status quo, but to keep rich people in power too, right? So it's just, and then of course he talks about, the different ways that people have tried in the past to reform the police and why that just does not work. Essentially the police are workers of violence. They deal in violence. You can't just turn that into a social worker. You can't just turn that into a grief counselor or like that doesn't work.
Yeah, I don't know why we keep trying to make it work when we see over and over again that it doesn't work. But since we're on the topic of systemic racism, why don't we talk about racism within the gay community? I'm gonna plug this documentary again because I think it's really good. It's called Disclosure. I like it so much because they cover a lot of issues within society and within the LGBT community in general. And one of those being how we neglect our trans women of color and how they were like the first ones to throw the rock at Stonewall, were, the pioneers of us trying to get our civil rights. But then right after all of that and we started organizing, we kind of pushed them to the back and we kind of ignored them and we kind of made their needs less important because they could just wait. And I think that's something that until right now we're barely talking about, and I think that's something that you brought up.
So I mean, there is a history amongst minority groups with co-opting, and white people, and this is how systemic racism again works and just seeds everything. Pride started as a protest against police brutality, a riot by two trans women of color, but it became a party for majority white queens to enjoy. Now, am I saying pride as it exists is just awful? Yeah, I'm not gonna take that personally. I'm not gonna take that leap, right? Like I think what World Pride, for example, managed to do and managed to accomplish was incredible. I think the social capital, all that stuff, is impressive. There's a whole gay rights movement that has managed to jump onto, the forefronts. It has actual economic weight now. And that's incredible. To me, that is something that could benefit everybody. But the only way that that kind of stuff helps everybody is if, again, we dismantle institutions of systemic racism that put the people who started it at the back of the bus. So we're talking about trans Black women and trans Latino women. They should have been at the forefront the whole time, reaping the benefits of this gay rights movement. But for whatever reason, they're only just now getting a piece of the pie. That's absolutely messed up. Just as well, I'm trying to educate myself personally on the difference between equality and like equity and, how that can show up in different areas. And this is definitely a matter of kind of equity, I think. At this point, white gays benefit from any, progressive movement for the LGBTQ community. Like, that's really how this works, like white gays have the privileges. That means that anything that happens with gay people just inherently benefits them. That does not necessarily trickle down all the way as you start to add different, intersections of people's identities. So you have your white gays who benefit for everything. Well, the white cis gays, our cis men, they benefit from just about everything. That may not hold true for a cis lesbian white woman. That then may not hold true exactly for a cisgendered gay Black man. Again, you keep adding intersections and it just kind of trickles down. What we're talking about is then going all the way to the bottom, the people who have benefited the least. And again, that's our trans people of color, and pulling them up first. Now, that's probably an oversimplification of what needs to happen. And there's so much more conversation around capitalism and how corporations have infiltrated pride movements, how that has watered down the message. All that is important and needs to be talked about. And it really just kind of reinforces what I was talking about earlier with what's different about the Black Lives Movement right now. People are not allowing folks, white people or corporations, we're not allowing folks to co-opt this message. It is going to benefit Black people. And this is also why the LGBT, or excuse me, the Black LGBT, the Black and Latina, the people of color LGBTQ community, that's why we need to be saying all lives matter. Because at this point, we're not going to let ourselves be forgotten by the broader Black Lives Matter movement. There's so many different things happening.
Yeah, and it's a whirlwind of emotions and things that are happening. But talking about pride, to me, it's pride and pride celebration and Pride Month have always been two different things. For me, Pride Month is the month where you take the time to learn your gay history, which is from how did it looked to be gay in the Greek time, and how was it before AIDS, what was the norms of gay people, and how the the world at large saw gay people, and what happened with the AIDS epidemic, and what happened with Stonewall, all those, marriage equality, that gay history. But then there's to like Paris is Burning and Wigstock and all these like pop culture things that happen that have to do with our gay history too. So that's the month. It's that month you take for that. You go to the LGBT center, you help out, you make sure you are proud, and you show your gayness, because being having visibility is an important thing. And then the celebration is just those 2 days where you go and you hang out with people that are like you, and you're proud, But for me, it's always been the Pride Month is more important than the celebration. The celebration could be anywhere. The celebration could be at your local bar. The celebration could be at the actual Pride events. But Gay Month is that month you take to actually do good for your community, if that makes any sense. Um, you take a moment to maybe even shop queer shops or queer vendors, so for me it's always been two different things, and I think people need to start seeing it as two different things. So you and me both are in the kink slash fetish community. You're a pup, and obviously I ran for CSW. And it is kind of a known fact that at least those spaces are majority white and have always been more white than people of color. And I think it is something recently has happened that we're barely starting to see people of color coming into these places that maybe before we weren't as welcomed or we didn't have the access to.
Think the way leather contests and the way the leather scene has developed is not necessarily based on race, but again, because of systems of oppression, there was kind of this filtering that happened where only certain people could get into the culture. And, inadvertently, one of those things that happened was it was mostly for white people. Leather is expensive. And if you want to get into it, you got to have some coin to be able to afford you some leather gear, right? So in the early days, obviously, some of the only folks who could afford leather would have been middle to upper class white men. Um, that's obviously changed recently. There are more people of color involved in the leather scene, but I think the essential truth of how expensive leather is has not changed. And so the people who can afford to really, really get into it continue to be middle class white men. Obviously, the kink scene is a lot broader than the leather scene. It encompasses more, but the two are kind of thought of interchangeably, I think, sometimes.
Yeah.
Uh, the result, though, is that there are a lot more people into the leather scene today than there were in the past, and there's a lot more diversity in the leather scene. But that didn't come without kind of being intentional about breaking some of those filters that I mentioned, so making it more accessible to people who can't afford it. I mean, as far as my own journey and what have people have told me about kind of what the journey of leather looks like for them. There is a pride in collecting pieces over time, be them things donated to you, maybe somebody you really came to care about, some sir or daddy or what have you, you know, gives you something, passes something down. Like, I love those traditions. I think those are super awesome and have helped contribute to more people, especially people of color, getting into leather. I think without those, it would still be most majority middle class white men. Like, that's just
It's just how it
and
is.
it yeah, and it has less to do with just like overt forms of racism and more to do with economic mobility and whether or not you can afford to get into the culture. Now, is that to say there aren't racist leathermen? Absolutely not. There definitely are. That's
Not even a question. But to your point earlier about us helping each other, Miguel, your better half. I when I ran for CSW last year, I didn't have the formals, and he let me borrow his formals, and luckily, it fit, and I looked good in them, and I don't know, it felt nice to know that people in the community have your back and want to help you succeed and want to help you win and want to help you, you know, have that visibility. And Miguel is an amazing person. I mean, he's someone that like is a big part of the community, and he runs a organization called Reach LA, and he does so much good for the community. So it just was so beautiful to see how within the community we're helping each other, and I think that's what we need to do. And actually, we should do that all as a nation. Help each other and have each other's back. So in closing, how do you feel about, our future, and what kind of thoughts do you have in, or hopes do you have for the future?
um well, I think things because of COVID are definitely going to be different, but in terms of, you know, how racism in America is dealt with and how systemic forms of oppression are dealt with, how the police are dealt with, only time will tell, honestly. I definitely think that the protests and riots in these different cities have been historic. I think it'll be difficult to go back and pretend like they didn't happen. Like, no one's saying that'll occur, but whether or not any changes actually happen, that is kind of yet to be seen. We, again, history tells us mostly that, situations like this end up getting forgotten about, or at least, we go back to whatever semblance of normal it was before. But there seems to be something different about this that gives a little bit of hope, and you're kind of hoping, oh, maybe things will be different now. But just as well, you kind of hold that thought in the back of your mind of like, yeah, but maybe not. Maybe in a couple months we'll be back to business as usual. Um, but and when you asked me to come on and do the podcast with you, I real quickly started thinking about uh, all the different ways that the LGBTQ community has come through to try and change the world. Um, and I mean, we've done it so many times, right? Like, after like World War II, you had leather and kink. You had folks trying to we had gay liberation movements. We had, HIV/AIDS epidemic movements. We had civil rights movement. We just so many different movements in just like a really short period of time because people were just like, no more, goddamn it, no more. And this feels like one of those times where people are just like, no more. And so I'm hopeful that things will change. I'm hopeful.
I think we both are. Once again, I want to thank you so much for coming on. Um, you are someone that I that I look up to. I met you because of Reach. I actually the first time I saw you was when you and Miguel were talking about open relationships, and I for sure want to have you come on, and so we could talk about open relationships a little bit and other discussions. We love Drag Race, and I would love to have you on so we could talk about Drag Race together. But thank you so much for coming on today and having this conversation. I know it's not easy, and at least for me, this helped me, and it helped me at least put out a lot of my thoughts, and I hope it did the same thing for you. So your Instagram is amazing, and I know you do have a lot of resources, and you do share a lot of amazing things. So if people want to hear more of you, I mean, see more of you, and obviously hear more of you because you'll be posting videos of yourself. But if people want to see more of you and just want to get more resources, what is your Instagram?
So my Instagram is at Bryton. So that's actually what BRYT0N because I'm unique. And that's it actually. Fuck Facebook.
Well, thank you once again. Remember to subscribe, like, comment, leave a review, follow me at Chris Diva, or follow the podcast at Heart Talks with Chris. And I want to give a special thanks to Jamison for letting me use his song Fuckable. That's the song you hear in the intro. So if you guys like it, please go on Spotify and go check out his Instagram at JV Makes It Pop. And I want to thank Wendy for letting me use her voice in the intro.